What's up, y'all? My name is Chris Creed. Welcome back to the Wake Up, Get Better podcast. I'm really stoked you're here, and I'm really stoked about this conversation that I'm about to share with you that I had with Ryan Romano. Ryan, I've known him for a few years. He is a fantastic human being, but he also is the founder of the Underground Performance Institute. His work is based around helping create championship culture. So he'll come into a team or an organization and he'll help transform the culture of that team so that they can get what they want, right? So he helps people build confidence. He helps the team build confidence and build culture and also mentors them along the way. So this interview went in a direction I wasn't expecting, and I'm really excited for you to hear it. But one of the things that I really loved most, and I'll just say this on the front end, one of the things I loved most was hearing him talk about what it takes to build confidence and how that works, like on a level that's actually going to stick, and how to go back and find it when you feel like you've lost it, right? And so I'm not going to spoil anymore. We had a blast in this conversation. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Ryan Romano. All right. What's up, Ryan? How you doing, man?
What's up, bro? Like, I'm so freaking pumped. Like, I feel like it's been forever.
Dude, it has been forever. I'm trying to think of the last time I saw you. I think it was like, I don't know, man. Like, was
One
it
of the
you or
events. It
Denver?
has been one of the events. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
I think we were in Denver. Yeah, that's crazy, dude. A lot of stuff's happened since then.
And you were slanging events, and now I'm not
Yeah, dude.
slanging events.
It's so wild, man. It's so wild. I remember at the end of that event too, dude. I was like, so I was recording that event and we were live streaming it, and I had so much freaking gear. And I remember packing everything up and just being like, I don't feel good. Dude, I got home and I had like 103 temperature, and I was just
Oh,
toast.
damn.
Yeah, it wasn't the event. Obviously, it was that I was just sick and didn't know it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it
yeah.
literally built, and that sucked. But you know what's interesting is actually I had that happen more than once at an event. I don't know if like the stress of managing
It's
all of
got to
that,
be. Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
It's got to be just like
just
being overwhelmed. Totally.
yeah. Yeah, but it's a lot though. But anyway, man, I want to hear about what's going on with you and what you do. So, like, if you could maybe let's just give it like a little intro into the person of Ryan and the business of Ryan and what you're up to, man. Let's do it.
Yeah, 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 totally. I think the best way to describe this is, the buzzwords, right? Like confidence, performance, mindset, like identity is like I was once asked by a college coach. We were sitting down our initial meeting, and he was like, "Ryan, if you had to sum this up into one word, what would it be?" And that, to me, it really is like identity is. And so I went on this kind of, I guess I'll give you a little backstory.
Let's do it.
Is so for like 12, 13 years is I owned a gym, sports performance, right? Like training athletes, middle school and high school and college athletes. And what I found was the conversations were probably more impactful than the actual like training itself. Now, obviously, like they were paying for physical results too. Um, and so is I was doing this on basically like an individual level through individual conversations. And I was like, you know what? Like I wonder if I could like transform a team, right? Like I wonder if I could get in there and like change the culture, change their perspective, change the way they see things. Um, Essentially, again, kind of cliche, but like fulfill their potential, right? Like there's a reason why they were recruited. There's a reason why these coaches brought them in. And so I've just been fortunate enough over the last like few years to started like with one team to now like up to four, potentially even more teams of going in and just shifting their perspective, right? The way they see themselves, the way that they believe what they're actually like capable of. Because I think just naturally as human beings, we just tend to sell ourselves short, right? Like as well as I do, that's how we met was being involved in a coaching group, right? And so of like, just giving the outside perspective of, hey, like that's a good starting point in the way that you see yourself and believe, but like there's so many levels to this, right? And to me it boils down ultimately in the question of like who are you and how would you describe yourself?
Mhm.
What are the beliefs, right? What are your behaviors? What choices are you making every single day? What are the things that you experience versus what you want to experience? What are the emotions that you feel every day versus the emotions that you actually want to feel? And so for me it's just pulling those two worlds apart, right? Like this is the world that you live in, this is where we need to get to be. It's like, okay, now let's create this person. Let's create this identity and let's shift over, transform into this world and start living that person like every single day. And so to like give results, so to speak, is like within like the first team, the first season is team was they placed second to last in their conference and then they won a national title, right? Like, and now like, granted, like that wasn't all me, but like, it's just like getting them to see the world differently. And so, yeah, dude, like there's all the buzzwords, but I think it's defining those, right? Like you go into a coach and it's like, hey, we're going to transform your culture, right? We're going to give you confidence. And then they're like, my first question is like, okay, but how do you define that? And do they all see it the same way? And so it's just getting them, everybody on the same page.
Yeah. Dude, that's so interesting because it can't be that everybody is on the same page if you haven't done the work to communicate that, right?
Literally. And it's amazing. I don't know if it's ego or what, but like how many coaches think they're like, no, 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 like we're good. And I just want to be like, go poll. Cause I guarantee you, if you got honest feedback, there's generally speaking at least two, if not three or four different pages.
Yeah. It's like the telephone game, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Person up top says something, and then the second person gets it, third person gets it, fourth person starts to hear it a little different, fifth person they don't know what the hell's going on, right? So by the time it's probably how those responses would be.
Yeah, and like a lot of it too is at that age, like when you're 18, 19, 20, 21, and you view like they see their coach as like controlling their destiny, right? So you're going to tell them what they want to hear, right? If they're like, hey, like I recruited you because we're here to win national titles, or I recruited you because we're here to win conference championships, or I recruited you because we're here trying to make it to nationals. And then they ask like, hey, like what's our team goal? Like it's just going to flow, right? They're going to be like, well, to win a national title. But then they don't actually believe it, right? Like now we got to get, okay, like what do you actually believe? And so that to me is like that's the foundation of everything. Because again, I haven't experienced yet a team to where like all 20, 30, 40 people were on the same page like from the beginning. And so it's just getting those open and honest conversations, right?
Yeah. That's so interesting, man. So what is the danger of everybody not being on the same page?
At mediocre, right? Like I think that that's why a lot of teams is they just kind of you can call it plateau, but they just kind of meander around like the same outcome every single year. It's like, hey, like we were top 15 again. Hey, we were top 10 again, right? Like, hey, we were top 20 again. And I'm like, yeah, because like nothing in and of itself has like had like any kind of like major shift, right? It's like think of it like a boat or a canoe, right? Is if you've got five people rowing forward, five people rowing left, five people rowing right, and five people rowing backwards, you're just kind of like meandering around in that circle. And
Right.
that tends to what happened is like, and I'm like, it's the difference in between like incremental growth and like exponential growth. When you can get 20 or 30 people, it's like, man, you can pick up speed and then it compounds, right? Because now we're all clicking. At the beginning, you don't see it a lot, but by month six, the second year, the third year, it's like, oh, damn, we're that freaking good. And it's like, yeah, because like you're literally all after the same thing. You all actually believe it, which means you're all living it, which means you all behave that way, which means that you're experiencing those things and it makes you more excited to show up and practice harder, right? Like it literally trickles down into everything.
That's wild. So when you come in and like you're telling these kids and the coach that we need to shift the identity. Well, first of all, are you telling them that, or are you kind of roundabouts getting there just by what you're inviting them to do?
Yeah, so let's go one step
Yeah.
backwards too is initially when I come in is, and I think a lot of people in the industry, I think a lot of coaches just in general make this mistake is their opening thing is they're like, this is how great I am. And in all honesty, they don't give a shit. Right? If I come in, I'm like, hey, I helped this team win a national title and I did this and I did this and I did this and I did this. They've already tuned out, right? Because there is no relatability, there is no connection. And so for me, is having been a college athlete and having not been a successful college athlete, I'm literally like whiteboard, like this is why I sucked, right? Like, and this is what I went through. And so it's like, I'm like, how many of you guys, I'm like, fill in the blank. College is supposed to be in unison. They're like the time of your life. And I'm like, how many of you guys are stressed out 90% of the day? And they're like, yes. I'm like, but wait, they just told you that college is supposed to be the time of your life. Yet you're fucking stressed 24/7 and overwhelmed and have anxiety and like all the things. And so it's like, anybody feel this way? And they're like, yeah, like now we're speaking on the same language. I'm like, okay, so can we see that how we feel and how we're living, there has to be a shift there. And so it's getting them to understand versus like coming in, it's like, okay, we got to create a new identity. They're like, I'm not really sold on that. Yeah. Right. And so it's like, hey, this is how I experience college. This is what I went through. And like, I didn't accomplish a lot. Do you guys feel this way? Then like, hey, we might be on the path. Like you may accomplish more than I did, but it's like, it may not reach your full potential. So if we want something new, then we have to be able to shift. So it's like our personality, our behaviors, our choices, you know, all those things that lead to better experiences. And so that's kind of how I get them to the light bulb of like, okay, maybe there is something to this, like this personality and this identity shift. Versus, just coming in and like spewing on a whiteboard.
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, that makes sense. What you just said, it makes it sound like you're really good at this, which makes sense because you are. As opposed to what I would have done, which was like, guys, we got to change our identity, bro. So yeah, because I wouldn't have. You've obviously experienced that
through my own faults, right? It's like why is the room sleeping? It's like because nobody's connected, right? Like
Dude, that's the difference between like a really good teacher or instructor versus someone who is like fresh out of the gate, right? Who's just like teaching you all the things. It's the same stuff. It's just you're not actually learning it, right? And we've learned about this about like shifting the identity is almost like a covert mission, you know?
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So, but I'm curious if there's anything specific that you notice start to shift. Like, are you looking for things that are changing in them and like things they're doing differently that like jump out as like signs of like, okay, wow, it's actually working. We're getting there.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, honestly, at the beginning is in their language. Like, I just listen to how they talk, right? And so I can think of a very, very, very vivid example of an athlete like this past year. And like, what they kept talking about, like what they wanted. And I was like, but you don't want, you genuinely like don't want that, right? And so it was like, it was almost an argument a little bit. It was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think I do. And so the more I got her to like start to like see like the greater version of herself, it's like she never even mentioned that anymore. And it just naturally fell off. And so it's like all of a sudden now she was progressing. Like 4 months after our initial conversation is she like had blown her own mind in what she was accomplishing, like how fast like she was moving along. And so it's just almost like reiterate. I'm like, can you imagine if 4 months ago I had told you would have been right here, you would have laughed me out of the room, right? And she was like, oh my God, like 100%, right? And so I think that for me, that is like when it starts to click and then it's pointing out, because I can just point out, I'm like, you see how you've never talked about that in the last like month? And they're like, okay, that actually like makes sense, right? Because now the way that they're thinking and the way that they see the world and perceive the world is portrayed for me in their language and their actions. And so it's like just listening to them, since a lot of the teams I'm only like on site like once a month. And so it's a lot of conversations. It's a lot of text messages. phone calls, Zoom calls, things like that. And so for me, it's just like listening to that dialogue, and then like from the coaches of like, oh, dude, like they're crushing it, like they're like growing, and I'm like, yeah, like I can hear it in their voice. So for me, I think that's like the first thing that probably stands out is the language that they use.
Interesting. That's really interesting. I've heard, you know Myron Golden, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So Myron, he does these, he does a lot of live streams and he posts a lot of YouTube content. But one of the things that he has talked about recently is the idea, like the power of language and like the power of words and how it's not just it's not just like something that we made up. There's this like power like um, behind it, you know.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing is really interesting to me because you hear people and the things they say, the things that actually come out of their mouth. I noticed this even on the internet, man. Like the things people type out. It's
Yep.
like, do you really believe that about yourself or about the situation? Is that you can instantly see and hear someone's worldview by the things they say or the things they type. And yeah,
And I
there's a lot.
think that yeah, in my world and like what I deal with is I think that's the number one thing that causes the most confusion is they use words without having any context of like what the word actually means. And it's not that like they're bad words, is I'm literally writing out like, so I'm heading in like 2 days going to speak at a camp. And so a part of that is defining what words mean. I'm very generic. And I usually ask like the crowd, the group, whatever, is if you could have one non-physical thing that would help you, your big domino, right? Like move the needle forward fastest, like what would it be? So non-physical is like outside of like running faster, jumping higher, better skills, things like that. And like without question, like the most popular answer, probably 95% of the time, is confidence, right? Like if I
Mm,
had more confidence, like I know without a shadow of doubt, I accomplish what I want. I'm like, great. So what is your definition of confidence? Because you're telling me this is what you want. Now, what is it? And then like there's these blank stares. And like the two most common answers that I get, I'm like, they're like, well, it's like believing in yourself. I'm like, okay. And they're like, well, it's trusting yourself. I'm like, okay. So now the question becomes, so what's the definition of belief? Is it confidence? Because now you're just interchanging words, right? And so it's like you have no, and so I always say, I was like, it's like your parents sending you to the grocery store to buy apples and you don't know what apples are. And so for 15 years, you've been on this hunt for confidence and don't have any effing clue what it is. No wonder you're frustrated, right? Like no wonder you're freaking out. So now let's give it a definition so that we can find it, so that we can, because it's not magic fairy dust. And so it's something that we have to like actually like put context to, so that you're like, yeah, that's it, right? And so, and it's making definitions like super simple, right? Like, Myron does this. It's actually who I think I like heard it from, because one of the words to define is to decide, right? And so he pulls it back and from its Latin root form, right? Like to cut off,
yeah.
right? And so it's like literally that's one of the examples that I use. It's like when you make a decision, like when you decided to come to this university, you cut off all other options. You didn't go anywhere else. It became this was the decision, right? And so it's like if you decide on a team mission, then everything else is irrelevant. Everything. And so I think dumbing it down, like I'm glad you brought him up, because that's such a good example of like, for me, like belief, right? Like the definition that I give them is like, it's just a thought you continue to think. So if you think about it long enough, it just literally becomes a belief, right? Like, or you hear something and it spins in your head from your parents for 15 years. It's like, that's
Mm,
your belief, right? And so it's like, how do we shift beliefs? It's like, okay, now we got to think about that differently over and over and over again until it becomes a new belief. And so it's just simplifying things, because I think going back to like, again, like your statement on language, it's like you're using words that like you don't even know what you're after.
yeah. It's really powerful,
And it's
especially
confusing, right? Like
yeah. Yeah, dude. And like going back to the identity thing, like especially words, especially that you put after the two words I am, right? Like I can't remember who I heard say this first. It may have been Dave Whitley actually. He may have been the first one I heard it from, our mutual he
Yeah.
was in the group with us. But he told me a long time ago that I am is a creation statement. Like if you look at the actual text of the Bible and talking about like whether you're in that religion or not,
Yeah.
it when the Bible talks about creation and it talks about who the creator is I am. And so anything that comes after the two words I am is a creation statement, meaning that like if you say I am lazy or I don't even like saying this shit out loud, but like I
Yeah.
am this or I am that, you're declaring that over yourself as a part of who you are, right? And so do you talk to them about that? I bet you hear that all the time. Like I am trying, or I am like, I bet that happens all the time. Like,
100%. And so I think where it comes in like the most is how they describe themselves potentially. It can be as a person, but even like if we want to like really narrow the focus into like their performance is like let's just use because I work with like a lot of like gymnastics teams like I'm not good at beam. I'm like, well, there's not a bad beam gene. There's just not, right? You may have to work harder than some others, right? But like for $1 million, you'd probably figure it out, right? Like, so it's not like it's not genetically inherited, like that, like you're just like, well, they're this, they're that, and so it's like getting them to be aware of, like you're saying, those statements because it can be about themselves, it can be about their team, it can be just about their potential, and so yeah, 100%. And then obviously like on the personal level too, because I think that obviously like those coincide, right? Like if you're going home and you look in the mirror and it's just like I'm ugly, I'm out of shape,
yeah,
no one likes me, like all those things, that's
piece of
definitely
shit.
like
Yeah,
yeah, like that's going to carry over in the gym. So it's like how again language, like how are you talking to yourself, like
yeah,
with those statements. And I think what's even more interesting is you'll find, at least that I've found, is again, when you ask them to describe themselves, they don't even have answers, which can be like, like, you're just stuck.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That would be trippy, man. Like, because I would imagine that with a lot of athletes when they get to that point, it's almost like I would imagine that some people are. We can shift gears after we get through this. I feel like we've been talking about this point a lot, but there's a, I, f- there's a that point I think in the college years where like you probably have some people who are like that have been really committed for a long time and they're like really
Yeah.
like maybe like looking at Olympics, like they're like super hardcore. And then there's also these people where it's like, I just happen to be good at this, and I got a scholarship, and right, like now I'm in here, and that's kind of been their identity the whole time. Is like I don't know, like I don't know, dude. It was that way for me when I went to music school on a trumpet scholarship, and and I fell in line with that path because I just happened to be good at music, and nobody
Yeah.
ever like told me like to think about anything else because I was just naturally like it just came to me naturally. And so I just went with it. And so if you had asked me then, like all of my identity probably would have been wrapped up in that. I wouldn't have said anything else because I wouldn't have had anything else to say about me because I didn't think really. That's really the truth of it. I didn't think. And I bet that there's a huge difference in those two camps of like people who are I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's the same thing. But you tell me. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes along with like what you're saying is I think there's like two boats of like first like everybody's like dreamt for like 15 years to get the college scholarship, right? And then there's those people, it's like as soon as they get it, they're like ready. They're like, okay, now my vision, now my aim is towards like winning a national title, being an all-American, like whatever the thing is. And then there's the others that are just like confused, lost, spinning their wheels a little bit because they got the number one thing they've dreamed of for over a decade. And so it's like they just haven't even thought about like, okay, like
Mm.
what's my next desire? And so it's like they do okay, right? They're not bad, right? Like they had to get to this point. But again, it's like they're stuck with that same person that they came into. It's like, I mean, it's the cliche, right? Like, what got you here won't get you there, right? And
Yeah.
so, it's like once you got here, yes, this person and your abilities will allow you to perform up to a certain level. But the idea here is like you were recruited, somebody saw something in you that's probably even more to help the team accomplish X. And so it's getting them to like see that, like, hey, don't you see? And so yeah, those would kind of be like the two categories. There's those that just keep churning along, right? It's
Yeah.
like, okay, we did this, what's next? Okay, we did this, what's next? Okay, we did this, what's next? I had an athlete, actually probably one of the like best relationships I've had with from early on. And about a year and a half in, excuse me, she asked, she was like, when does it end? And I was like, when does what end? She was like, when does it stop of like wanting the next thing? I was like, never. Like that, like, don't you want to continue to grow for the rest of your life? Right? Like,
Mm.
don't you want to be curious? Like if you made $1,000 or accomplished X goal, like could I do 2,000 or get the next thing? Right? Like it's the curiosity that drives you to be able to like wonder what you can accomplish. And it's like you're not going to do everything, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's where where I was going to take it next is like, dude, you're laying the foundation for these kids, like
Yeah.
for lifelong, like out. That's a huge, it's a huge deal. And I think, as I was saying, like before, where there's a lot of people who just kind of stumble through things. And, I think in some ways, like following that natural flow might be okay if you are coming from a place of clarity to begin with. But if you're in this, like, if you don't have any idea what you're about, like how to shift your beliefs, you don't care about any of that. You don't care that there's these set things in your mind that you probably didn't put there that are
Yeah.
controlling everything you do. Then if you continue to stumble through your whole life, you will just continue to get things that maybe aren't exactly what you want. But I think there's a whole subset of people who just don't care. They think that's what life is. Whereas you're installing in these people who may have even been like that up until the point where they met Ryan, and then Ryan gets a chance to remap some of these beliefs, right? That are going to spread like this web in your mind. Have you ever heard of EMDR therapy?
I've heard of it. I'm not like super like educated like behind
So
it.
I did it for over a year for some like deep trauma stuff. And the
Uh-huh.
way it was described to me is that early, like if you have something happen, it creates this like hub in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And then things start to splinter out around it. That may be like beliefs or like what you think about whatever. And it's almost like you're watching this VHS every morning. Like somebody hands you a VHS tape, which kids, a VHS tape is what we used to watch movies on before the internet was here. Okay, so you put it in this thing called a VCR, which I don't even know what that stands for. Anyway, so it's like somebody hands you that, but you put it in every morning and you hit play and you believe everything it says for
Mm-hmm.
like without question. That's what it's like when you have this stuff running in the background. But when you do this type of therapy, and there's a lot of other mechanisms to get here, the way it was described to me is if you cut off the root, like if we can get to the root thing, that's
Yeah.
like the big domino, like you were saying, like everything else falls. And it's not like you're not going to be able to remember that traumatic thing or whatever. You will, but it's just not going to impact you in the same way. It's not going to be something that you're going to look at and say, this is who I am because this
Mm-hmm.
happened. And I feel like that is what it looks like when you start to kind of crack open these beliefs and shift and help someone shift their identity into who they really want to be. And then it creates these splinters in a positive way, right? These beliefs that confirm that this is who they are. And that's really cool. So anyway, I just had that thought just hearing you talk about it.
Yeah, I think too is to piggyback off that is again, I think part of my role is not to I actually tell them is like I will never tell you I will never tell you like who to be, what to believe, anything like that's not my role. It's not even that's just way overstepping. I don't even know another way to put
Yeah.
it.
That's what,
um,
yeah. Like, let me come in and just pave over and just form you into who I want you to be. I don't know about
yeah,
that. Yeah.
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 But uh, it's it's really just asking the question why, right? Like I like the example I always give is because I think it goes to like your root statement, like getting to the root of things is if you say you believe X, excuse me, is if you say you believe X and I ask why, and like the example I always give is, hey, I believe in God. Why? Because my parents made me go to church on Sunday growing up. That's a really bad belief, right? Like that's like right, like that.
Yeah.
And so it's just helping them. Like if you can tell me why, and if you can't, that's the discovery that needs to happen. Because I always say it does one of two things. It's going to reaffirm that belief 10 times stronger, right? Like, I believe in God. Why? And you go on this dissertation about like what he has done for you and your belief and your faith and your like, and it's, and you can start to talk about that and describe it. It's like now again, like VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, like now it's like, it's hardwired even more.
The laser disc, man.
Yeah. You're the tech guy, right? Like I'm actually all the one always texting you. I'm like, how the hell do I get this freaking camera set up? Or it's going to do the other where you discover it's like, I don't know why I believe that. And so it might make this shift. It's like, I don't actually want to believe that. I've just never thought about it. And so I think that for me is kind of that foundational question of like helping them get to the root of things because if you can't give a reason why you believe something, then like you probably need to sit on the edge of your bed and think about that one.
100%, man. And I think there's also some, going back to Myron, actually, the other thing he's been talking about is recently in his things, he kind of does things in an interesting way. I don't know if you've ever watched his YouTube videos, but he would create these videos for a long time, like for years. And this is something that can help all of us who are out here, running stuff and creating content, is to figure out what format is going to work for you. This is a huge sidebar, but I just had this come in, so I'm just going to talk about it. So he would create content and create these videos, and he was just talking to the camera, and it really wasn't going anywhere. And then someone came along and said, "Hey, you get on these stages and you like blow people's minds, and like they're standing up, they're like applauding you, like giving you a standing ovation and stuff, and you need to figure out a way to recreate this on your YouTube channel." And so now, and I don't know how he does it actually, but what he does is he invites people into his studio, which is like a huge building. There's a stage. He's got the lights behind him and everything, cameras, and there's people in the audience, and he's doing the same kind of content, but he's doing it to a live audience and has a different vibe. You can feel it's like a different there's different stank on it, you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's awesome. So anyway, but one of the things he's been talking about in those videos recently is that about questioning beliefs and not being afraid to go into conversations about those. Like if you're not willing to, because you're afraid that you don't believe it enough. So like his example is like he's like, I'm not afraid to talk to people about my faith and even talk to somebody about questioning it because I'm not worried about stopping believing it because that's how deep it is. I'm trying to think like I would like to list out some beliefs for myself where I could talk about like, oh, here's the reason why I believe this so strongly. And I'm not afraid to talk about it with you and have a conversation because it's not going to actually go anywhere for me. Like you're not going to convince me otherwise. I don't know that
Right.
I don't know that I could think of an example right now where I don't know. There's probably some, but anyway, and I think there's something to being willing to have conversations around your beliefs and even knowing even being willing to have someone point them out to you, because you know, the deepest held beliefs that we have, we don't even know that they're beliefs, right? It's just something that we just do it. You know, there's no, like, I don't even think about it because I believe it that much. You know what I mean? It's almost
Yeah,
automatic.
yeah.
So yeah, dude, that's fantastic. So, all right. So let's shift gears and talk about, why is this work important to you? Like, what is it that made you like want to do this?
The short answer is I was so miserable. Is I think even on like I always ask people on my show is like with what you're doing, is it because you experience pain, because you experience pleasure, or like a combination of both, kind of a
Mm,
hybrid? And mine was 100% pain, right? And so it's like even in high school, not accomplishing the athletic things that I wanted to, and it was sheer like because I wasn't like firm enough in me, right? Like I was very much the people pleaser, the I don't know if this is like the goody two shoe boy. Like I was not goody two shoes in the sense of like I was gave my parents hell and all sorts of things and made a lot of poor decisions
yeah.
in my life, but in the sense of like I tried to like follow all the rules and do the right things like in the practice room, or you know I like worked hard in my eyes, and yet still never. And to me, like the hard work was only up to like some point, but like at some point you have to be able to perform, right? Like you have to be able to, at some point you got to get on the stage, right? Like, and you know, I didn't have, everybody saw me as this awesome athlete, but yet didn't have like the accolades to like back it up. So that was
Mm,
high school. And then like got to college. And because I kind of only had that within my identity, and I got there and wasn't going to be like starting on the team or making a roster, and just like went down this deep, dark, like depression, suicidal rabbit hole in my first semester in college. And so obviously like got through all that. And so it's like looking back, and it was like, if I can help and know, like, I mean, I kind of have like the data in terms of like stress, worry, anxiety, like where especially college athletes are. Um, like what they're experiencing and what they're going through, and then just through conversations is like reaffirming that is like, okay, let's not live in this painful world, right? Like there's a
mm,
whole nother world of like pleasure, right? You know, like with Josh, like we've talked, like described those worlds like pit and possibility and chaos and confidence, right? Like all these different areas, pain and pleasure, right? Like we can describe them. But I think that was for me, that's how I described my life. It was just very painful and unfulfilling. And so I think like kind of a corny example is one of the first athletes. This is like when I owned the gym. Like actually, this is probably like the first athlete like I ever started training, and it was a wrestler. And long story short is he ended up winning two state titles, and I'll never forget. Like he came to the gym, sat in my office, and like I had like put a little picture. And I was like, "Hey, sign it. Like we're gonna hang this in the gym, whatever." And like as he was signing this, I'll never forget this. He's like, you know, like this isn't fair. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, what's not fair? And he goes, "You're so much better than me." Like he's like, "You're such a better wrestler than me, and I have two state titles and you have none." And I was like, that's the point, right? Like that in and of itself, like that is the purpose of this. I don't have an ego to where it's like
mm.
I gotta like live my life like vicariously through you and like feel accomplished because you did the things. Like I'm accomplished because you're experiencing pleasure, right? Like because you're doing the things that you set out to do. Like that's what makes me excited. And so I think that like continuing to like have people like kind of like uncover, turn over the stones of like what is possible, what does that pleasurable life look like, what does the confident life look like, and how do you wake up and experience that every day, not wake up and be like, I don't really want to live today, like what's the point, like this is. And so for me that was like my personal experience. And you talk about like whenever I go into like schools is like that's literally like that's the opening story is like my life was miserable. This is, and you guys like, I'm not saying you guys are suicidal, and I'm not saying you guys are depressed. Like, and you guys like just overwhelmed and stressed the fuck out, and like, like just really want to like be in a totally different arena. And they're like, me, please, sir, right? And so I think that's what's like pulled me towards that, more than like anything else, to just like help people like experience like what I didn't get to experience, even though I was like more than like capable of it. And I think we all are capable of it at some level.
Yeah, for sure, dude. It's kind of wild how much of that is mindset. As you were talking, well, first of all, thanks for sharing that, because I think a lot of people can relate to that on some level, and I think a lot of
Yeah.
people have just kind of resigned to the fact that, like, well, those were the good old days. I experienced that, that, and like, dude, no, like, I don't know. It's there's a shift that can happen internally. And what I was thinking is that I just to kind of mirror that story a little bit. Like I said, everything came naturally to me in music, and then I got a scholarship into college, which I lost because I just wasn't an asshole who wasn't going to class and stuff. So
Yeah.
at the beginning, so I figured that out and started doing better, but I didn't I was wholly unprepared for the next level, and so I come in as this like hot shot and quickly find that everybody else is as good as me or better. And I'm like, well, this is different, from my experience. So slowly I started to experience issues like with, what an embouchure is?
I
You ever heard
don't.
that word?
Uh-uh.
The embouchure is what the form of your mouth when you play an instrument. So
Okay.
like when you have trumpet, the embouchure is like right here. It's like right here. So it started to shift for some reason, and now I'm realizing that it was a not now I'm realizing I've realized this before, but I had this picture come forward because you said at some point you have to perform, at some point you have to step on the stage, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna come back to that in a second. I started to do this, and it started to affect my ability to play in the range that I was experienced in, which was extreme. Like I could play these crazy high notes, and that's kind of my shtick. I was that guy, right? And I wanted to get better at that, and I started to lose a little bit of that. And then I was working with a coach at the time, and he said, "Well, let's change your embouchure, and if you do that, it's like starting from the beginning, dude." Like,
Yeah.
so I had to
Yeah.
go all the way back to the ground, and I lost all of my confidence. And I got back the next year, and I had been practicing over the summer, and I played for the top guys there at the school, and they were all like, "Hang on a second." And one of them leaves and goes to get the professor, and guy comes back in, and he's like, "You got to hear this." And I play, and I'm thinking like, what is happening? Like I'm just playing. This isn't. And they were like, "You," and they were like, "We want to give you the lead role." And I was like, "I don't think so, man. I'm not good like anymore." Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and they were like, "No, you don't understand. Like that is the best sound I have ever heard." And I was like, I still don't even really believe it, like that actually happened.
Yeah.
But I never, but when I got on the stage, I remember this one time, dude, I had this like solo, and I had lost my confidence level so much that I just couldn't do it. Not that I couldn't do it on the stage. We ended up doing it on the stage, but I remember in the rehearsal room, I had trouble like mentally just perform. Like it's like my face would lock up. It was the weirdest shit, man. And I'm
Yeah.
realizing like how deep that was, and how I started to lose that belief, and how like depressed I felt about that. I wanted to leave and like all this stuff. And I feel like that's such a common experience for people, especially when they're good at something. But like I forgot where I was going with that, but it was around the championship idea. Like you were saying that the guy said, "Well, you're such a better coach, you're such a better wrestler than me."
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, but you now have that person that you were working with now has the belief that they can do this, and they can. I almost feel like that's more important. I feel like people need that in their corner when they're going through that transition of like maybe they were really 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 good, and now they've kind of up leveled, and it's really uncomfortable. And have you ever heard of the what's the name of that book? It's written by Gay Hendricks. He talks about the upper limit
I don't think so.
issue. So it's a whole other thing, but it's like, we continue to go back to our level of comfort,
Yeah.
but we will rise, like we'll go up here, but then we'll reach what he would call the upper limit, and then subconsciously we'll start making things suck again so that we get back to the stasis, right? And then we'll go up again, and people just ride that wave all the time, man. And so what I'm getting at is that with the people and the work you do, this is a lifelong thing that they're getting. And how cool is that? Especially at that time where things are so confusing, for kids and stuff.
Yeah. For your example, I've heard kind of the same thing, but like I forget where I read it, heard it, or whatever. But like from a thermostat, right? Like whatever our identity is like, and then like the AC kicks on, right, to pull us back down to like who we really are, who we believe we are. If it falls below, like the heat kicks on to like kick us back in gear to get us back to like our normal
Yeah.
sustained self.
Right.
Um,
So you can be okay. Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So good. You're getting something from that.
Totally, totally. And I think too is like that's what everybody always asks, like why college? Because I think that like at least in my experience, the majority are like they're going through a lot, like you said, but I think that's when people become a little more curious. When
Mm,
you're like 14 and in high school and you have your parents' credit card and like they've paid for your car, it's like, like, like you hadn't gone below the thermostat yet, so to speak. You're kind of like, I'm okay. I'm
yeah.
doing all right. Now there are some, but in my experience, it's like, yeah, like once they kind of like get off on their own, and in their eyes, in high school, it's like their mission is they feel like is so clear because it's like I just want the college scholarship. I just want the college where anywhere. I don't care, right? Like that's and
Mm,
so it's like it's hard to get a lot of those people, kids to understand that again, you can create this experience. It's like, I especially when it's like colleges, I'm like, have your buckets, like have your dream bucket, have your like, hey, like if I'm not quite there yet, but like I'm on the trajectory, it's like those school bucket, and then like the bucket of like I can pick up the phone and they'll offer me today. And so it's like, you can kind of, it's like, okay, like where do you really want to be?
right.
Um, Clarity, right? Another buzzword, but like most people claim to be super clear. And then it's like, again, you ask them, it's like, where do you want to go? Anywhere. Like that doesn't sound very clear to me.
100%, man. And I like yeah, go ahead.
Or I was gonna say it's like I try to like relate it in other areas of their life. So I'm like, you just date anyone? And they're like, whoa, whoa, no, no, no. I'm like, okay, like let's like what does that look like? Right? Like you'll take any job, like, right? Like, what do you want to do? Like, I don't care, whatever makes me a lot of money. Like anything? You'll do anything to make a lot of money? Like, I don't know. Like that's dangerous, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like using those like life things to like pull back into like sports. It's like just like how you're trying to describe who it is that you would date. It's like that's how we got to like treat
Yeah.
this season, this year, like the things that you want to accomplish too.
Yeah. That's fantastic, man. So what is so is it what's the story of the cobbler's kids not having shoes or whatever, right? We're like they it's the same idea of like we can do this stuff. We do this stuff for other people, but maybe I don't do it enough for me. So I'm curious if Ryan, if you have like what does this look like in your own life? Like how do you put this into practice in your personal life?
Yeah. So actually, it's funny because we can kind of relate. Is um, I don't remember when he said it, but like going back to like one of our meetings, like with Josh, is like I'll never forget like one of the big, big, big takeaways that like I took like in being in that group and being around him. He's like basically these weren't his exact words, but it was basically like you have to be the walking billboard of like what your framework and process is. It's like because if you can't like walk, talk, speak it, then like they're not going to buy it, right? And so for me is taking each element and not even I think I would early on tried to obsess about like trying to be like too deep involved in like what my like I gotta live it like just very almost like surface level generically of like each step. And so, for me, it's like literally on the edge of my desk here is like I give like two worlds, but like I really like the person that I want to be, right? Like I give it a
Mm.
name, and like I've got like a world with a stick figure, and like literally all the things like how I'm supposed to live, right? And so it's like A, it's just a reminder, and then B, it's like I think what I found recently to utilize it the most is when things are going good. I think we want to like revert back to our ways, like when shit hits the fan, but like really focusing on it's like, but we can create like when there's momentum, right? Like when we're feeling good. And so it's like really doubling down like on that. And then the other major piece, and it actually kind of goes into a little bit of the story that you were talking about and like how we really do need belief and like where does that come from? And so I call it like building your deck of cards, right? And so like each card, each win, each thing that like accomplishment, feeling of success, whatever you want to call it, it is a card, right? Like now, I think of it like spades, right? Yeah, have you ever played spades?
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Okay,
Many of long nights.
okay,
Yeah.
all right. So you'll understand because a lot of people, like athletes, are like I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. I'm like, all you need to know is the spade is the trump suit, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
concept. And so like you have certain accomplishments in your life that like maybe the king of spades, right? It's like when you think back to that, you're like, bro, like I am the best at this. Like no one can hold a right. It's like, and then you've also got like your two of diamonds, right? That's just kind of like it's good, right? Like, and those are things, but you need them all in your deck. And so that's for me personally, it's funny because literally last night is a text an athlete that's now graduated, and I was like, "Hey, do you think that I helped you or the team out in this season at
Mm.
all in any form or fashion? If so, would you be open to either texting me or ask them? I was like, would you do a 60-second video on like the transformation that I gave you and or the team?
Mm-hmm.
P.S. I'm doing this to build my own deck of cards, right? And so it's like now if you think that I helped you, if I don't, it's like it's cool, it's fine, right? Like don't BS it. But if you do, right, it's like I have these videos. I can obviously like use them for helping me out, like it's proof to the world. But also it's really like it's building my own deck of cards. It's that affirmation of like I'm not looking in the mirror. Somebody's looking at me and telling me it's like this is how you transform my life.
Yeah.
And so it's like maybe it's the two of diamonds, but maybe it's the 10 of spades, right? Like I don't really know like within each athlete. And so the more I live that, it's like reaffirming having the proof. Again, that's my analogy I give all the kids is like, how do we continue to build this deck so that when the big moment comes, when we do have to perform, is I go, my only job is to literally, I go, this is why it's so important for you guys to brag to me because I'm going to keep that deck. And when the moment, and when the moment comes,
What? What is that?
did you just see the fireworks?
Yeah, but why?
I have no idea. That was amazing. When,
What just happened, dude? That was perfect. It's like,
uh,
oh my God. Sorry, that probably
I,
threw
ho-
me
I
off.
hope you like post the video, and I hope that like people can like see what just have transpired.
That was
Um,
incredible. That was majestic, dude. Oh my God. Presidential.
you talk about like manifesting things. I thought something's coming out of this, right? Like I'm
Yeah.
not sure
I
yet, but
didn't
like
touch
so,
anything. That's
I
what's
know
wild. Anyway.
that's anyways. But for them to brag to me is like when the moment comes, right before the big conference, and it's like, hey, like there's one athlete that calls me literally before every competition, right? Like picks up the phone, it's 5 minutes, and I literally just tell them back what they tell me, right? I'm like, don't you forget, like you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this, and they're like, oh yeah. So I'm like, either you're a liar or you have to believe me, right?
Mm,
Like, like you can't, I can't fake that, right? It's not some fake motivational speak. It's like you got this. Come on, like believe in yourself. You're so great. Like that's not going to transform anybody. Where I'm like, don't you forget you did this card, this card, this card, this card. So that's for me is kind of like how I live it in my own life. I just kind of have to play the cards for myself.
dude, that's so good. The deck of cards, building your hand. Man, that's fantastic. Because I think a lot of like we were talking about confidence earlier, a lot of the lack of that for people is just lack of perceived results, right? Like even if something happens, like just like going back to me in that audition where like I couldn't even hear that it was good.
Yes.
And then other people are telling me that, but I don't believe it because I can't perceive it. And so that I didn't perceive the result, and therefore the confidence stayed low. But
Yeah.
if you can undeniably point to like, hey, what would you see as success? Well, like here's this, this, and this. Okay, here's an example of you doing this. Here's an example of you doing this. Here's an example of you doing this. Continuing to like build that scaffolding underneath someone feels like the answer. And this could be in any arena. Like I feel like with like success in business, especially too, like if you're doing work with clients and you've experienced this, I know, where you're like, if you're doing this work that you're doing now for clients, if you couldn't point back to those video messages or anything like that, like you wouldn't have the confidence to show up in the room the same way that you do. Right.
Yeah, it's the Jim Rohn, like forever. One of the hardwired things I remember, like listening to him, he was just like, never trust your memory, right? And so it's like, even as impactful as things are, is like you're gonna forget, even when things go well. And so it's like, again, it's the physical deck of cards, so to speak, whatever that looks like. If it's writing it in a journal, if it's on a piece of paper, if it's, literally getting index cards and calling them your deck of cards and writing them down on that. If it's a Google Drive of videos that you have, right? It's going back because you're like, oh damn, I forgot about that conversation. Because it's like if I had done this for 13 years now, it's like, dude, it would be insane. And so it's like I'm having to go back and kind of like remember to the best of my ability. But how many things have I forgotten? And so for me now, it's being super buzzword intentional about like not letting those things like pass by, right? It's like it's so easy for me not to send that text message last night to get that, right? It's kind of like, oh well, I helped, like it's okay, like I'll remember that, but like I don't know what's going to be on the video, right? Like because they were like, yeah, I'll send it to you in like 2 or 3 days. I was like, awesome, great, right? So it might be like life changing, may
Yeah.
not be, I don't know, but like you
Yeah.
just don't know, and so like, I think again, kind of we push all the basic fundamental things away, right? They're like, okay, deck of cards, right? Like, whoa, whoop-de-doo. It's like, man, like, but if you had 100 of those, like,
Yeah.
you'd feel like a fucking badass going into a competition.
Oh, 100%, dude. Yeah, I can't imagine. Like, I did a first, so I haven't competed in anything since college, probably something after college. I can't remember. I mean, I've performed like music after college, but I don't know if
Yeah,
I've competed since then. But I recently did a jujitsu competition, which was awesome.
yeah,
So jujitsu is one of those things where you can do it like you could start doing it right now. I don't think you train, do you? Like you don't train
uh-uh.
jujitsu.
Uh,
You would be great at it. So with the wrestler, it might be a little uncomfortable because you end up on your back a lot. But there's but for you, that might actually be great for you because you just start try to reverse the thing. So anyway, but it's one of those things where as an adult, I just saw like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to compete at something again. That's kind of
hmm
cool. And so I walked into that and wholly unprepared for the experience that I was about to go into because on one hand, I didn't feel prepared at all. I felt like I didn't know anything, but I also knew that I was going up against someone who was roughly the same level and
yeah,
had the same skill set. So I was fairly okay with that. But you're standing at the edge of the mat and you don't like it happens fast and then you're on the mat and then they say go and that's like and then you're in it, dude. And you're fucking yeah, I'm competing. Like I'm on the floor like with this person I don't even know. And then you totally forget like I totally forgot everything. And I just locked this dude
yeah,
up in a closed guard and I just held him down. And I tried a couple like moves and stuff, but I just held him down. And immediately when I got off the mat, I was like, "Oh, I need I need to develop this, this, and this, and this." And so there's almost this like I'm starting to realize what my deck of cards needs to be for that because
yeah,
but before that I didn't even know that I needed any sort of confidence in any element of that. And so there's something to in every aspect of life to going out and, metaphorically stepping on the mat and
Yeah,
saying,
yeah,
we need to see where we are. And then let's start to build up our confidence in that way. And I'm doing that now with the work I'm doing with individual on these clarity sessions. So I knew that I needed to build confidence around that. And so I'm doing exactly that of like, I'm just going to get a bunch of people on the phone for free. I'm going to do this for them. And we're going to walk them through the process, and then I'm going to get feedback. And one of the crazy things that happened, dude, is I was having a conversation with somebody I've known for a long time. We photographed their wedding, and like you guys were at the house, like a long time ago. They used to live out west, and we were having a conversation about something, and you like mid conversation, you said, "Hey," she was saying this about me. She said, "You said, hey, you don't have to hold on to that, right? Like you can just let that go, and you can just move on. It doesn't have to be something that's a part of your life anymore." And
yeah.
she said, when you said that, I don't know, something just clicked in me, and I've never forgot that conversation. And I never would have known that had I not
Right.
had this
Yeah.
conversation and done this session with them for free to like start to build that deck of cards. And now that's another thing that's like, oh, this for me, like one of the things I was feeling self-conscious about is like, oh, I'm just kind of starting this out of thin air. I don't really feel confident in it, but I don't feel confident about talking about it. And because I've never done it. And then she reminded me that there's a piece of me that's been doing this kind of work in everything I do for
Yeah.
a decade plus, you know? And I never would have known had I not asked and like started to figure that out. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of time the fear come right. It's always like the fear of judgment, right? And so I think how people like perceive, hey, I'm going to launch this like new thing. I'm going to like start helping out like a few people, whatever that looks like. Um, and then we never like pull the trigger because they're like, well, what if they hate it, right? What if they talk to me and then there's somebody else, but like they compare me to somebody else and they don't like me. And so I think of it is, as you can kind of like see like in the background, it's like I'm starting to build out like a little office because I'm going to start this is like, no one knows about this, but essentially start a school group and invite, if coaches want to be involved, and like record videos, so to speak, for free, right? And like just show coaches these things, right? Like what defining words look like. Let's define some of these words, right? And just give it, like just literally just like put it out there. And
Mm.
honestly, so I have a buddy who Army Ranger qualified who's helped me this past season. He would like record some videos for the teams. Like, I'm like, hey, like I'm talking about identity. Like, how does that, because like you can't compare, right? Like one of the big ones is like, how do we take what we do in practice and like make it in competition? And I'm like, I'm not trying to be funny, but like he doesn't get to practice killing people, and then he has to like go out and literally kill people, right? Like to save his life, right? And so it's like, if getting him to talk about that because that's his experience. Anyways, like having him involved in it and like just sharing some of those stories like within the group. Uh, my point being with all this is like I was like, dude, he lives in a different state. I was like, man, like I just need to come out there and like we need to like rent this like conference room and like we need to like da 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 da. And then I was like, dude, you know what? Like, what if we just recorded on Zoom? Like I'm like way overthinking this, right? Like I'm worried about what are these coaches? What are they gonna think if like we record a Zoom versus like if we rent out a conference room and have the mics and like all the things? It's like, you know what, just go. Right. And so it's like for me, it's like just getting the few necessities that I need, a whiteboard and some things, and like literally just hitting record and we'll see what happens. Right. It may bomb. It may suck. No one may be into it. No one may want to come to the group, and that's okay.
100%, dude. There's definitely a big. I have always had that mentality of like I am just going to go, and it's almost like it goes. I'm noticing this pattern, dude. I'm talking to you. It's like this where like I've had this. I've been naturally good at starting things and making it work because I had this like I don't know, maybe this like beginner mentality or like whatever, like, the beginner's pluck idea where it's like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'll just start it and then we'll see what happens. And then it works. But after a while, I started to doubt my own success in that. And I think you get to a point where you're like, oh, like I've done this and this and this, and now am I really going to like switch gears again and do this? Like I really believe in this idea, but if I do this, what are people going to think about that? And you start to get
Right.
in your freaking head about it, and then, but the truth is, like you can still just do it the same way because people don't care. Like they'll grow with you. You know, that's the thing. You know,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're our own worst enemy, right? Like,
at
and I
times,
think it is, I know, like Hermosi talks a lot about this too, or one of his big points is like the fear of like judgment, right? Like if no one was watching, um, you ultimately like wouldn't care,
yeah,
right? And so, if I was recording the video like just for me, it's like I just whatever, it just would be. And so yeah, like being able to extract yourself, um, and again, like his method of like looking at it is like expand the time horizon out far enough and like none of these people matter or you don't matter both, right? And so it's like I think just taking that into account, like just go, right? Like it just in 30 years they're not going to be talking about that school group, sorry, like just or
no,
50 years, whatever it is, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The years are going to go by anyway. You know, whether you are successful or not. So, or whether you write the book or not, or start the podcast or not, like any of that stuff, like you, I don't know, man, it's something I've always talked about on this show. Like I started this show at documenting the process of building a digital marketing agency. And I never switched the feed. I just left it all on there because I want people to see or to be able to go back and see like what that looked like and what the kind of things I was
Yeah.
thinking about in those moments. And for myself as like a almost a diary of like, what did it look like in those years and what was I thinking? And ultimately I ended up shifting gears from that, but it is a reminder of that like, I started that in my son was like 2 years old, I think, when I started that. And it's like, dude, he's 7 years old. How like how much longer are we going to go? You know what I mean? Like the years are going to pass anyway, whether or not I build the thing I want to build, or if I just continue down the path I think I should go down. So why not let's just go ahead and do the thing we want to do, right? So
Yeah.
that you can truly be, you know, fulfilled and fulfilling the thing that you're actually here to do. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
much
And
so
I
much
think
mind crash.
too, it's like especially like when you're 18, 19, 20, is it's tough to believe. I don't remember where I heard this but it definitely, I think it's definitely true through the majority of our lives, but it's like your circle, your network, your friends change like every like 3 to 5 years. And so for them,
Yeah,
I'm like, look, who you hung out with middle school probably changed when you got to high school. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, who you in high school changed when you got to college, right? So it's like we're like 3 years, 4 years, 4 years. And I'm like, when you leave here, it's like it's gonna be different. And then like if you get in a relationship and get married, then it's like it's gonna be different than it was like those previous like 4 years. And so it's like because I think that like right now they're like college is this one like almost like defining time of
yeah,
like I have to find my people now. I'm like yes and no. Like find your people for this chapter of your life, but I promise you it's like you might stay in touch. You might call and FaceTime, once a month or whatever, but like even if there's five of those people now, it's going to be down to like one or two, right? If there's 10, it's going to be one or two. And so it's not getting too hung up on these people matter so much because again, expand the time horizon long enough and it's like it's going to be irrelevant, right? And it's like even now it's like it's very fascinating too is so most programs have like names of like previous champions and it's like I'll usually go in and ask because they get so caught up on like the thing, right? Obsessing over the thing. And so I'm like, okay, there's a board of national champions, all Americans, whatever, behind you. It hangs here. You pass by it every single day. Name 2 to 3 people on that board that you have not been a teammate with. And it's like 95, 99% of the people can't do it. I'm like, so it doesn't matter. Like, stop freaking out. Like, yes, we want it. Like, let's do the things to go get it. But you obsessing over it is pushing it further and further away. When in the long run, it's like, they're still never going to remember you. Even if you're on that board 10 years from now, I'm not going to remember you because you just proved you can't remember them.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. What a mind twist, you know? Because you think that like, oh, that's like immortality or whatever. But I mean, like, even like Michael Jordan, like we all recognize like his greatness, but how many people actually can say that they know him now, like actually know him? You know, it's
Yeah.
not that many. Like I know of that. I know that that happened. I was there. You know, I experienced it as a child, which was fucking great. But
Yeah.
you know, it's over now. It's past. It's different, and now it's a memory. You know, which is a thing, but it's not. You know, it's not everything. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the my ultimate like goal with that is like we're gonna do the things to get the thing. But like I always say is, and I know like before we jumped on the call, it's like I was telling you about like the mentor that I had, like Deborah, that I spent and she helped me really understand. And I'll give two examples of like when you obsess, we create this gap, right? Like when
mm,
we gotta have it, we gotta have it. And we're thinking about it like 24/7 and like the like stressful anxiety, like I gotta have the money, I gotta have it, I gotta have this, like whatever it is. It's like, and so for the athletes, I go, if you name somebody like you would date, right? Like, okay. And if you woke up every single morning and they were like, do you still like me? 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 Like, after about 3 or 4 days, 5 days, you'd be like, I used to, not anymore, right? Like there's this obsession. They got to know, they got to know, they got to know. And what does it do? It pushes you further and further away. So when you're like, I got to have it, I got to have it, I got to have it, this result, you're creating this gap of like, you know, again, you're chasing versus attracting, right? And so when you obsess is like, again, you create this gap. And my own life example is actually like my TED talk is, I had like applied and was like freaking out. And like one place had like, I don't remember if they like turned me down or like I never heard from them. One of the scenarios, right? And so I had applied to it like for a second one. I auditioned for it, and I just remember like almost like obsessing over in my email, like like I need to know one way or the other, blah blah blah. And I don't remember if I reached out to them, but I'll never forget. It's like this, like the day or the day before. It's like when I like just totally let go of like the end result is I got an email that said is basically or a phone call. No, it was a phone call, and it basically said, hey, something's like been up with our email system. We've been trying to email you to let you know that like we totally like want to have you on board. Blah 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 blah. The whole thing, right? And so for me, it's like the obsession was like sounds woo-woo-y, but like that's probably what was wedging the email to come through, right? Like it was like I was creating this like, "Ugh," and it's like I couldn't even get the desired thing, even though it was there. It just needed me to be able to receive it, and I wasn't willing to receive it.
that's wild, dude. That's a wild
So,
story.
so yeah, like I mean, I've seen again going back, like how do I live these things? It's like utilizing some of those stories. It's like, dude, like sometimes you just got to let go, and
Yeah.
like when you let go, then you allow things to be able to like come into your life.
Yeah. Something else I learned from Dave Whitley a long time ago was he would talk about struggle, and he would say like, because I don't know if you knew this, but I met Dave, and I don't know why he's coming to mind so much today, but maybe I should text him. But he I met him he ran a kettlebell gym, and he was like a
Hmm.
master level kettlebell instructor. It was incredible to be there during that time. But he would talk about this kind of stuff all the time, and he would say he talked about struggle, and he was like, the only way to struggle with something is if you're holding on to it, and like holding on to it really tight. So the way to stop struggling with it is to just let it go, and the
That's
struggle
good.
disappears, you know.
Yeah.
And I was like, damn, that's so good. But I feel like we get so attached to that struggle piece that it becomes part of your identity, and then you start to do that in everything. I'm curious to shift gears completely. I saw your TikTok. It's awesome, and that's cool. And I'm wondering, how that process went. Like, how does one get a TED Talk?
Yeah, I mean, so I went on, there was like a list of like where potential, like locations were.
Uh-huh.
And, and then I just started contacting the, ones that like made sense, like for me. So at the time, like the one I did was in Dallas.
Yeah.
And so I was
To
back and
go
forth from
made
Dallas.
sense to like travel to and go to in person. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I was actually, my now wife was like, we were living separately, and I was still in Birmingham. She had moved to Dallas, and so I was like transitioning. So I'd go out and visit like once a month. So it just made sense. There was nothing in Birmingham at the time coming up, but there was one in Dallas. So I was like, hey, like I'm going to and from there anyways. So anyways, um, applied. They did a like a face to face like interview kind of
Mm.
type thing, and then like a mini audition. And what's funny is, so I remember like kind of like having all my notes out because it was on Zoom. This was like, so the first kind of like conversation was basically kind of like a little weed out, like we're good, like probably from a personality standpoint.
Yeah,
Um,
we're we're
like
good.
and they a lot of them have a theme, and so they want to like make sure that like personality and things like what is it that you would be talking about. They want to make sure that it matches up with what their theme is for that specific TED talk.
Right.
And so the whoever's in charge of that location, they get to kind of like pick the theme and like what it's going to look like for that year. So I'm sure that that's kind of that. But the Zoom kind of audition is had all my notes out, and I'll never forget because I wasn't trying to like read, right? Um, like 80, 70% in, 80% in. Like I mean, I like you talk about like blacking out. Like I just like I totally forgot everything, and I just like looked down. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have to like look at these notes or like whatever. And so go through it, finish it up. And so the first question they ask is, I'll never forget this. And it's so funny that like this natural confidence like came out because it's kind of not me a little bit at the time. But anyways, they were like, tell me how you think you did.
Oh,
And yeah, it was the first thing. Like they gave no feedback. They just literally, I ended, I was like, that's it, whatever, however it ended. And they're like, all right, so tell me how you think you did. And even though I like blacked out or whatever, I literally looked at him. I was like, I think I did awesome. And I was like, I gave them three or four reasons like why I did, and they were like, yeah, like we like it a lot. They're like, we love your energy, we love like everything. We think this like coincides. Um, so then I went out in person, and they had like it was like 4-person panel, and so
okay.
you kind of do it again. They kind of already picked you, or at that point, it's more of a show us how you're going to present it, and then we're going to
Mm.
like help. Like for me, is like I remember doing it, and they were like, okay, like you talk about this, and like so one of the statistics I gave was like you know, suicide is like the second leading cause of death for some age group, right? And they're like, when you talk about those things, like hold up. So like when you say it's the second, right? Like hold up 2 fingers so that they get the visual. So they kind of like almost like coach you a little bit on like how to go about that. Um, yeah,
That's
and then
cool.
yeah. Then we did the rehearsal. So got it. We did the rehearsal, and dude, I was the first. They were like, "Hey, you're gonna like kick this thing off," and I'll never forget that night. I go rehearse, and I'm literally up there with the mic, whole auditorium. It's like just the TED people there, sitting in the audience. And I walk out there because they like do the like it's like a play, right? So like the speakers like introducing you, and so you come out,
Cool.
blah blah blah. The MC's like introducing you, and I walk out there and I stand, and dude, I like totally blacked. And so literally in the mic, I just go, "Oh shit." And like everybody, it's like all the other speakers are like, "You got this, come on!" Like, and so I'm standing there for like it felt like an eternity, whatever, probably
Yeah.
20 seconds
Yeah, probably was.
until like like everything just kind of like came back to me, and yeah, I ended up flowing through it. I'll say this too is the night of it, I haven't been that nervous in a long time.
Mm.
I was so nervous. But yeah, that was kind of the process and going through. Got to be some cool people. So Beyonce's dad was at my TED Talk. So
What?
like, yeah, so
That's
like
crazy.
got to know him and like actually we like I say like we're friends. Like we like communicate from time to time.
Mm.
So like kind of built a little relationship there. There was another. Her name is brain fart. Can't think of her name, but she's like three-time Emmy Award winner. I was like, that's I think what got me nervous is all of a sudden I was like,
All these
man,
people.
I'm the most badass one here, and then everyone's like, dude. I was like, oh shit.
That's funny, man. That's
Yeah, it
interesting,
was
especially
wild.
like so. Have you ever spoke on stage before? Like, was that the first time?
That was largest audience.
Yeah,
It
right,
was like,
right.
yeah. Most of the time it's been, yeah, like at universities, yeah, like with teams
Right.
and stuff. Yeah, it's like, and that's so easy for me to just go in and like command a room versus like, and you have to stay on the red circle too, right? So it's like me, I'm very like very active and like that helps me like just kind of control the room, so to speak. I don't know,
Yeah.
because I can move around and like it just allows versus like kind of being confined. I was like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah, dude, that would be wild. I noticed you on that circle, and I remember having that thought of like, man, that circle's keeping him in a box. I wish he could just run around the stage.
yeah,
But I feel like
yeah.
everybody must feel that way though, dude. And I mean, there's like the prestige of having given a TED talk, and just I don't know. It's just an acute example of what we were talking about though, about the deck of cards idea, right? Of like if you have a lot of proof that you can walk into a university or speak to, like you have a lot of proof of that you can do that, and so it's not a problem. But like walking onto a stage with whoever's in the audience, you don't know, like it's different. The lights are on, dude. That's trippy.
Dude, it is like blinding bright too. Like I don't know how like Broadway people, I don't know how they do it
I don't know either, man.
because
I
it's
mean,
essentially, kind of the same uh I guess vibe, lighting and everything else. So, yeah,
yeah,
it was blinding. It was cool. It was
yeah,
wild. Or concerts, right? Like if you're a musician, like it's kind
yeah.
of the same thing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I've performed on stage a lot, and it's always surprising. Cause in a way, it's kind of nice because like all you can see is the lights. It's like, oh, it's all good. We're just up here. It's the same, same thing we did in practice, man. It's what we'll do here. So
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I vividly remember I could only kind of see the people in the front row. Like everybody else, like I couldn't see.
yeah, yeah, that's really trippy. I feel like doing things like that, man, is like especially as someone who has a message to share and you have your business revolves around like a message or a framework that you teach people, giving like intentionally seeking out experiences that are going to push you. That's thing number one. But intentionally looking for opportunities. It could be a podcast, it could be anything, where you get a chance to talk about your thing is so huge. I've known people who have done podcast interviews, dude, and they just take what they said on there and they turned it into a book. So like
Right?
you're like especially TED Talk too. Like you could take the audio from that and you turn it into a book. You create audio books like if you have a chance to share your story, your framework, what you believe in a spot, you should do that and you should seek those things out. I mean, I think too many people are maybe hesitant or scared to do that or whatever, but I think it's like the most like it can be the most liberating thing for your brand and your message to do that. Even though it's scary,
Yeah.
whatever. But
Yeah.
if you seek it out, man, like it helps you clarify it. And like especially podcasting, I feel like podcast is a great opportunity to just like almost go on a tour and talk about stuff you like and like it helps you develop your thing. Have you noticed that? Like doing your own show, I feel like I mean, I don't know about how I feel. I feel like I've gotten a lot more comfortable just talking about stuff, you know, and solidifying ideas. Has that been your experience too?
Yeah, I think like being able to just sounds so like rudimentary, but like hold conversations like without any kind of like planned agenda, or it's almost just like being able to like get to know people, especially it could be people of status, right? Like, and when I say status, I just mean like within your niche, I guess is the best way to put it. So it's
Yeah.
like, hey, here's national championship coaches, or here's Olympians, or I had I read his book, and like I literally was cold email. Have you heard of Brandon Webb?
Oh, it sounds familiar. What's
So,
is it?
so he was a SEAL. He's written
Okay.
like 20 books.
Whoa.
He was the one that wrote, I should say, rewrote to what they now use as the program for SEAL Sniper School. Is he went in and was just basically like, hey, this can be better. Um, anyways, like, I mean, I've had people like that. Like, I was just like, hey, dude, I read your book. It was awesome. Like, would love to. He lives in like freaking Portugal or somewhere. Like,
Cool.
um, but like crazy story. And so it's like, I think just, I view that as like a high status person, like compared to me, of all the things that they were able to accomplish and the like lives, so to speak, that they were able to impact. Um, and so I think just being able to sit for an hour with somebody like that and just like, I call it like shooting the shit, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like hold conversation and not want anything has been really helpful, like for me, and just like comfortability of like it doesn't matter like who I come across. It's like we'll talk about anything and everything without any kind of like planned like agenda. Is I actually, it's funny you bring that up because I usually tell people on the podcast, this was before like I relaunched. I used to like call it like unbreakable confidence, and now it's the championship corner. But when it was unbreakable confidence, I used to use a script. And there was,
Mm.
if you go back to like those, like they're awful. They're awful conversations because you can just feel it, right? And
Yeah.
it's like
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
ask a question and they give like a 2 sentence answer, and then I'm like, wait, that's it? Like that's all you
Yeah.
got? Like I didn't know like how to like follow up and like plug and like like guide people down the path and like help them like okay, but like help me really I didn't have any of that ability, and so this has just helped me dive deeper so that when I have conversations with athletes and coaches, it's like okay, but like help me understand why, like how does that
Right.
like actually like make you feel, and like where are we going. So yeah, I think just communication overall.
Yeah, dude, I totally agree. I think it's I feel pretty good about just having a conversation with anyone at any time. you know, yeah. So podcasting is a great method for that. But I mean, just any sort of way that you can step out of your comfort zone. And I just had this thought yesterday that AI is really huge, and it's affecting the coaching industry. I think in some ways because I mean, technically, like AI can be a coach. You can ask it questions and it can give you generic answers. And so, what's the answer for people who are in the business of helping people, either on a one-on-one or a group basis, like the work you do? What's the answer long term? Like knowing that that's just going to continue to grow and shift and change things. And I think the answer is that the tide is going to start to shift from looking for like the perfect answer to looking for the human answer. And
Yeah.
and the way that you do that as an individual who is leading a movement or a brand or whatever, is that you show up in an authentic, vulnerable place where you're willing to work off script, and you're willing to have conversations with people that go deep, or and you're willing to screw up. You're willing to not. You're willing to be human. There's going to be a tide shift in the direction of people who are looking for things that are distinctly human, and the way
Yep.
that you do that is to show up vulnerably, right? And so, in any way that you can seek that out, if it's podcasting, I think it's really great, a really great medium for that, or if it's just doing videos that aren't perfect and polished, that you're putting out somewhere where people can see you. Or even if you're getting on stage and being willing to be like a little shaky, right? And a little nervous,
Yeah.
like visibly shaken by the fact that you're on stage in front of all these people. Like that's the kind of stuff, man, that's going to make you stand out. And people love that. It's just like when you were saying you were on the interview with the TED people, right? They saw that like, oh no, he's willing to do this. Like he's scared, but he doesn't care that he's scared, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the key, you know. People are going to start looking for that. So anyway, that's a sidebar, but I think anything like that would be valuable. So do you have anything to say about that before we go on?
No, I was going to say the only thing I was going to add to that, I heard a long time ago, I'm not taking credit for this, and this has kind of always helped me, like in conversations and in being in front of groups, is the they don't actually care about your message. They just want to know, do you believe with what you're saying, right? And so it's like if you can portray in a genuine way that like I believe what I'm actually telling you, then like they're going to like it's gonna
Yeah.
an element of it is gonna stick if they're open to it. But if they look at you, no matter how true it is, and it's like he doesn't believe like what he's actually saying. And so it's like I think that's the biggest kicker of like especially in front of like teams is I'm just so wild, so obnoxious, and like almost intense. And it's like I tell all the coaches, I cuss a lot, but I cuss like kind of stealing with Tony Robbins is like power and language, right? There's a difference in get your butt up and hey man, get your ass up. There's just
Yeah.
there's a drastic same thing. Um, uh, so they feel that intensity in front of them as a group, and they're like, I don't know that I'm sold on this identity thing, but Brother Man is certainly sold on it. So it's like
Yeah.
I'm either gonna like yes, I'm all in, and then there's the others that are just like 100% turned off, and then there's the middle ground of like, all right, like I'm not sold yet, but like the way that he presented this is like, all right, it's kind of got the wheel spinning versus the typical college professor. If I presented it that way, it's like that isn't gonna land.
No, for sure. And it's funny. I was thinking about like you were talking about. I took a public speaking class in college, and you had to prepare this like argument speech, and my argument was why smoking is bad. I don't know why I went with that, but I prepared this presentation. And in the presentation, I had things that were just blatantly not true. Like that, and I don't know how I researched this or like I heard about it or something at the time. I don't know. I didn't research it. I didn't do a very good job of this speech. But what I did a great job presenting it as if I believed every single word of it. And I ended up getting an A on the presentation. One of the things I said was like, yeah, they removed all smoking from film because they didn't want to encourage the act of smoking anymore, which is not true. That's
Yeah,
not true at all.
yeah,
Like like you see cigarettes everywhere. But I don't know. I said it with such confidence though that the professor didn't even blink. Like he knew obviously that wasn't true. And I didn't know it wasn't true at the time. I actually probably believed it. I don't know, but I ended up getting an A on it. And that's just an example of that. One of the things you mentioned, Tony Robbins. I was at a Tony Robbins event one time, and you know how he brings people up and he'll like work with them one on one,
yep.
like 3, 4, 5,000 people, and he was working with this woman, and I can't remember what it was, but he's talking to her and she's talking to him, and then all of a sudden he just says, "You're kind of a little bitch, aren't you?" And I was like, "Whoa!" Like, did he just say that? And like the whole crowd, like there was kind of like some laughter, but it was really uncomfortable. And she kind of snickered, but then she shifted, and then he shifted his tone into something else. It was like a clear like pattern interrupt of some sort. And there's probably people that are going to hear that and be like, well, what an asshole. All I'm saying is like the rest of that conversation like got to a deep emotional core level with her that she actually shifted her, like something that I can't remember what the actual conversation was, but you see like a physical shift, and,
Yes.
and it kind of opened this window, and it just confirms that like language, even strong language like that, can like just kind of break into a space, and that's how powerful language is,
Yeah.
you know.
It's funny. So I went to his business mastery umpteen years ago, and he did that exact one with somebody else. And I'll tell you another one he did is I forget this dude standing up is talking about some struggle in his business, and like he just looked at this dude and basically was like, he was like, your wife should fucking divorce you. And I was like, whoa. Right. And it was like, it was the pattern interrupt. And then it's like, it got to the point of like bringing it full circle all the way back around. Cause I forget what it was. If he was like dabbling and he was doing all this and he had like within his business, like he had his spouse, like doing all these things and like whatever. And so like
Yeah.
in his brain, he was like, okay, like there's my go. But yeah, like I remember everybody in the audience being like, oh my God.
Yeah, dude. And there's so much like anyway that there's so much hate on him for things like that. I think from people who I've never been there and experienced what that's like, and I don't know. Like I obviously you wouldn't want to say that to a stranger on the street, but if your job is to be a transformation coach, right, and you're trying to
And
do
you've
that,
paid that type of money to go to an event like this, then hey, like I'm gonna give you what you paid for.
yeah, 100%. Well, dude, I'm running up on time here, but I want to ask you, like, if if anyone who's listening to this, maybe they're an entrepreneur, maybe they want to be an entrepreneur, maybe they're creative, even athletes or whatever, where where do you start? Like they're hearing this and they're thinking, I can see that there's some things holding me back. Like, and I can see the way I talk to myself. I can see the identity that I've formed over the years, and I want to change that. Where do we start?
So I'll give you the analogy first is I always say, ask like the kids, I'm like, if you're going to travel somewhere, right? Like if you're going to wherever, go to San Diego, right? Like whatever it is. And you open up Google Maps. I'm like, what's the first thing it asks you? And everyone's like, your destination. I'm like, no. The top bar, it needs to know your current location. And so I think like most people are very unaware of like their starting place. And so, if I'm going to go to Chick-fil-A from my house, but I use my Morgantown, West Virginia address where I lived in college, that's not going to help me go get lunch today. Right. And so I think having this understanding, this foundational understanding of like, where am I starting at like right now? What are the things that I believe and like, do I actually believe them? Where did they, dude, we're two for
What
two
is
on,
happening? How come I don't have those? Oh
I
my
don't know, but like
God.
thumbs
I'm
up,
sorry.
another fireworks. This is insane. Anyways, like what are those beliefs? Hey, again, going back to our language, like how is it that I actually like talk to myself? What are the behaviors that are serving me and aren't serving me? Um, so I think it's a lot of times you do need to know like where your destination, so to speak. Um, but I think that's kind of step one of like the old way in the sense of I think everyone like has been brought up of like write down your goals, right? What is it that you want, right? And so they write down 30 things and 2 weeks from now they don't remember any of them. And then a month from now they don't even know where that piece of paper is, right? And so I think getting super honest about like where it is now. If you're in business, it's like, what's your bank account look like? I think Hermosi's kind of made that very popular of like waking up in the morning and check your banking account. It's like, I don't know if I do or don't believe that in a certain sense, but I think that like most people don't, right? Like, and so I think taking inventory of like who we are, our beliefs, where do they come from? Is it what I actually want to believe? I think I wrote this down this morning. I'll read it off. Is like if you want things to change, then you have to look at things differently.
Mm,
And I don't know that like I think that like best describes, but I don't know how to look at it differently if I don't know what it is that I'm looking at.
yeah. So that's step one. Yeah, I like that, man. I think so. What I wrote down is that like where's the starting point? Like if today is day one, like where's the starting point? So take an assessment of where you're at, a super honest assessment, and list out all the things you could possibly think about where you are, and then craft
In
a
the
vision.
brutal most, yeah, in the brutal most honest way.
Yeah, right. And I think a lot of people aren't willing to do that because it's very uncomfortable. And I think it's important too to like feel what it feels like. Like if you're being honest about it and it doesn't feel good, like go ahead and feel what that feels like. And like, okay, this is okay. And then work through that feeling, like just let it move through, and then decide, okay, this is the vision for where we want to go. Right. And so,
yeah.
And then there's that gap, like you were saying before. So being careful now, not to, from what we've talked about earlier, being careful now, you can see if I'm getting this right. Careful now not to stretch the gap by obsessing over the vision, but to take, like, just keep doing the steps. Like if, like you said this before, like if we're going to do the things and it's going to get us the thing, right? So just not obsessing so much about this and stretching the gap so that it gets further away, but knowing that like, here's where we are, I'm going to do this. Then every once in a while, looking back saying, okay, I've came this far, so I'm going to keep building my deck of cards to confirm that I'm actually making progress, and then keep going, do the things. And eventually you'll look back and it's like, well, shit, dude, I was here and now I'm here. It's like, I'm just like right there. I'm about to be at the championship level, right? Of like where I want to go. Is this all feeling like your deal?
100%. And I think to double down, to reiterate, because you talked a lot about like just feelings is so an important part of the process, because the idea is you think you want the thing, but you don't actually want the thing. You just want to feel like you're moving closer to the thing. And when you feel like you're constantly, and when you're living in that state every single day, it's like you almost forget about the thing, because like it's that feeling, that how you wake up and you're inspired and just pulled and like want to have the conversations and want to do this. And then like you get the thing and you're like, okay, like that was cool. It's like, but I want to keep feeling this. Right. And so it's like, we think that the thing is going to drive the feeling, but like I got to feel it to actually get it. And so I think that understanding that, you know, we are emotional and feeling creatures, like that is literally how we're hardwired and created, and not to be confused is like the thing is kind of the North Star, but I want to feel what it feels like to have it and live that life along the way. And that's what allows it to show up, attract versus chase.
Dude, what a perfect way to like kind of put a period on that. Damn, yeah. Mic drop, baby. That's awesome. Ryan, how can people connect with you, bro? Like, what's the best way?
Yeah, so I think honestly is I'm like hammering down on LinkedIn right now, believe it or not. So I think that a lot of my niche in the sports world, player development, coaches and staff are there. So obviously Ryan Romano on LinkedIn. Same with Facebook. I call Facebook the casual LinkedIn. That's how I view it, right? Like it's just a little more casual, so I'm there. And then Instagram is just content. It's a lot of my podcast stuff on my Instagram. So if you want to find like just valuable things and like clips from the podcast and people that we're talking to, is that's probably the best platform for just like value purposes.
And what's your Instagram handle?
R-Y Romano.
Sweet. Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate your time, brother. This was very awesome. I think this might be one of the longest episodes we'll have, but I feel like, you know, things were just flowing and we kind of touched on a lot.
Totally, dude. Yeah. I loved it. And I loved catching up. Yeah, man.
Yeah. You too, brother. All right, man. We'll talk to you soon. And thanks again, dude.
All right. Peace.
See ya. Ryan, thank you so much for coming, man. That was a blast. I really enjoyed that conversation. I hope you guys did too. Hey, if you're still here, thank you so much for your time. I understand how valuable that is, and I really appreciate you spending it with us in this conversation. My name is Chris Creed. This has been the Wake Up, Get Better podcast, and I'll talk to you soon.
Slow down. There's nothing to get you